Long ago, King Hammurabi became famous not only because of his well-known code of laws, but also because of making Babylon into an empire. But as the human he was, he didn't live forever. So in 1749 BC, his son Shamshu-Iluna became the king of the four quarters. And if you're wondering what that means, well, it means king of the four corners of the universe. But his reign was not as prosperous as the previous one. Although he had power over many lands like Assyria, Larsa and parts of Elam, these were independent kingdoms just a few decades prior, and were being taxed despite having been invaded and losing many of their resources. Since a little cultivation crisis worsened, the people began falling into poverty and in debts, leading to revolts all over the empire. The reasons for this are debated, but the situation got so dire that Shamshu-Iluna had to proclaim a cancellation of most of people's debts. This was the so-called Amargi, which literally translates to return to the mother, which is probably the earliest written use of something similar to the concept of freedom, but in this case it was a mere tool to restore socio-economical balance due to the extreme situation. Assyria and Elam easily broke away from his power, and also a man from the south usurped the throne of a Sumerian city, stealing the name Rim-Sin from the last monarch of the former Kingdom of Larsa, who might have been his uncle by the way, so we will refer to him as Rim-Sin II. Taking advantage of the horrible situation in Babylonia, he managed to organize a major revolt, which inspired some more in Ur and Uruk in the south and Eshnunna in the north, for a total of 26 kings who engaged the armies of Shamshu-Iluna in multiple fronts. Problem is that these kings didn't really get along with each other that much. As a matter of fact, the king of Uruk commissioned a tablet in which he speaks about fighting with the other rebels, without mention of the king of Babylon. So maybe Shamshu-Iluna took a bit of a half-time break, coming back to Babylon to replenish, while the rebels beat the heck out of each other. But eventually he came back and managed to beat down the king of Eshnunna within a year, but defeating the rebellions of the south would take another 4 years, starting with a siege of Ur, destroying its walls and sacking the city. He would then do the same to Uruk and some other cities of the south. By 1437 BC, the rebellion of Larsa was crushed, and the life of Rim-Sin II came to an end. The remaining rebels asked Elam for help, who accepted and engaged the Babylonians in battle, taking advantage of the chaotic situation to get a slice of the territorial cake. Unfortunately for both the Elamites and the rebels, Shamshu-Iluna soloed them, having the Elamites retreating from Mesopotamia for the 327th time in their history. The victorious king of the universe celebrated his victory in an inscription. He caused the lands of Sumer and Akkad to live in agreement, and the four quarters to dwell under his command. Well, I think he celebrated a little bit too much and too early, cause just a few years later, the discontent caused by all that wall breaking and city sacking motivated another king to rebel. The latter claimed to be a descendant from the last monarch of the Sumerian dynasty of Isin from the 1790s BC, who was called Damikilishu, but his name was Iluma-Ilum, known by the Babylonians as Iliman. Giliman? His name literally translates to, "My God is the true God." If you're wondering which one is he talking about, well, I don't think anyone knows today, because the guy didn't specify, probably on purpose, to remain popular within the believers of multiple Sumerian deities. His war against Shamshu-Iluna seemed to be based in thinking that the Babylonians would be weak enough this time. And he probably had a point, because although the first battle ended in a stalemate, in the second one, Iluma-Ilum managed to repel the Babylonian invasion, after which, controlling the cities in the marshlands of Sumeria, he founded the first dynasty of Mad Tamti, today known as Sealand, in 1732 BC, and the name they gave to their capital, which could have been Lagash or some other coastal city, was Urukku or Urukug, which means the holy city in Sumerian rather than Akkadian, which is something particular about these people, their inheritance of Sumerian titles, names, and random words, living in the marshlands that used to be exclusively Sumerian lands a millennium before, and under the dominion of the Neo-Sumerian Empire just 300 years prior. It seems like they consciously strove to return to their Sumerian roots, although most of the population spoke Akkadian, and even if we don't know exactly what percentage of them was Sumerian, Akkadian or Amorite, it is very likely that at least half of them were mostly Akkadian and Amorite rather than Sumerian. They felt as honored to live in the remains of the late empire as the Italians of Rome during the Low and High Middle Ages, who even used Latin for education, formalities, politics, and so on, inheriting the Roman culture nearly as much as the Greco-Anatolic Roman mix that was the Eastern Roman Empire. It seems like Ur, Uruk, and other Sumerian cities were partially abandoned due to the conflict, the poverty, and the power struggle, and apparently most of the people with Sumerian inheritance had fled to the south, entrenched within the realm of Sealand. Shamshu-Iluna started a war to reconquer the country of the sea and regain access to the maritime trade, which was crucial. But unfortunately for him, the receding coastline made the land way marshier and soft, which the local Mad Tamti soldiers knew how to exploit, making him unable to retake it. Although he wasn't as great as Hammurabi himself, it is true that Shamshu-Iluna managed to keep control over Babylon despite the many challenges he faced. But yeah, he passed away in 1712 BC, being succeeded by his very own son, who continued the war against the country of the sea, lasting until the 1680s BC. The king Iluma-Ilum of Sealand, now that he was free of conflict, focused in rebuilding the economy and the cities, tearing down the walls of Isin to expand it and increase the workforce. They seem to have had a truce with the Babylonians, which was probably the consequence of a deal. If Babylon doesn't dam the Tigris and Euphrates, basically removing access to drinkable water and irrigation for agriculture, thus starving the people of Sealand to death, then the latter doesn't cut the Babylonian access to sea trade, thus being relatively codependent from each other. And their relationship with Elam seemed to be alright for most of their history. The times of the country of the sea were not short, but sadly, discovered tablets containing information about them are very few, leading professionals to perceive this period of southern Mesopotamian civilization as their Dark Ages. Yes, I'm playing it. I think it's the most fun of all Doom games so far, and I will die on that hill, although I do miss songs from the last two games. The reason for this might just be that they recorded information in tablets made of wood and covered in wax, which don't last nearly as long as clay tablets. The third king of the Sealand dynasty was called Damik Ilishu, which is exactly the same name as the last king of the Sumerian dynasty of Isin. The king number 6, however, was called Gulkišar, who actually ruled at the same time as the last king of the original dynasty of Babylon, Shamshuditana, around 1600 BC, and he was remembered as a great king, to the point that he had an epic written about him. The tablets are mostly damaged at the moment, but long story short, they speak about his war against his Babylonian homonym, and the last surviving part describes him getting ready for battle against him, and Gulkišar speaks. I will darken the day for the troops of Shamshuditana. I will fill the battlefield with their corpses. I will make my name known in the four quarters of the world, and they will praise my heroic deeds. Although the epic is likely an exaggeration of real events, it describes a major victory against the Babylonian king. Gulkišar also claimed to have conquered the city, but if he did, it was probably just a temporary occupation. But they did contribute to the success of the Hittite sack of Babylon in 1595 BC, when the Kassites from the Zagros Mountains took power. Without the presence of the first dynasty of Babylon, Sealand gained access to commerce coming from the west, and the presence of Sealand-style objects in the island of Bahrain implied that they might have made the land of Dilmun into their dependency for a while. They might have made a bit of an empire for themselves, the Mad Tamti Empire, the Lower Sea Empire, or something like that. As the Kassites got well established in Mesopotamia, the kings of Sealand intervened in their family struggles, supporting the member that was the most beneficial for them, of course, and they also struggled with at least one revolt. In specific, the kings Peshgaldarramesh and Ayadara-Galama, the later of which also built a temple for Enlil, the Sumerian god of the storm. And yes, the names of these kings are Pseudo Sumerian rather than Akkadian. In the early 1400s BC, Ea Gamil became king of Sealand, but he faced the expansionism of the Kassites, in specific, the army of the noble general Ulamburiash. The details of what happened around 1460 BC are very foggy, just like everything else related to these people, but a tablet describes the campaign of Ulamburiash. Ea Gamil, king of the country of the sea, fled to Elam. Ulamburiash mustered his army and conquered the Sealand. He seized Dur-Enlil and destroyed the temple of Enlil. As the Kassites conquered them, it is evident that the last king of Mad Tamti fled to Elam, and that the last kingdom with Sumerian culture came to an end. A mace head found in the area has engraved the words Ulamburiash, king of Sealand, suggesting that he crowned himself as king of the area, ruling Babylonia alongside his brother Kashtiliashu III in Babylon. The following Kassite kings made some renovations and reconstructions in the area, being plausibly the reason why we haven't found any buildings made during the period of the first dynasty of Sealand, because they were demolished. But despite everything, the people of Sealand earned their independence with blood and sweat, enduring well over 250 years, even longer than the United States of America have existed, repelling Babylonian invasions more than once and forcing them to live in codependency. And a fun fact, they are actually referenced in the game Total War Pharaoh Dynasties, what a long freaking name, where Mad Tamti is the name of the realm that many regions of southern Mesopotamia belong to, and also the units that can be recruited there. And also Mad Tamti continued to be the name of such province, being integrated into the Assyrian Empire, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, and so on. And that's everything. Thank you very much for watching. Leaving a comment actually helps a lot with the channel, believe it or not. And don't forget to subscribe, please. It's been a pleasure, as always. Ciao!